Tonight, the high-stakes showdown here in Philadelphia between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump.
It was as expected.
Opportunity economy.
Tariffs on other countries.
A bunch of lies.
Terrible economy.
Claim.
I created one of the greatest economies in the history of our country.
And counterclaim.
You're going to hear a bunch of lies, and that's not actually a surprising fact.
As Kamala Harris and Donald Trump traded blows.
His plan is to do what he has done before, which is to provide a tax cut for billionaires.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in.
But behind the rhetoric is the reality for a trading nation.
We're doing tariffs on other countries. Other countries are going to finally, after 75 years, pay us back for all that we've done for the world.
Donald Trump's plan would make the economy worse. Mine would strengthen the economy.
Who would be better for New Zealand? Welcome to NBR's Back in Business podcast. I'm Simon Shepherd. Less than 2 months until the US presidential election, and we've just had the first and probably only debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. The two candidates are offering American voters fundamentally different visions of the US government's role, who should pay for what, and how to fix America's high cost of living. But what do those differing visions mean for a small exporting nation down the bottom of the world? Joining me on this episode with their debate takes and economic insights, Dr. Asha Sundaram, Senior Economics Lecturer from Auckland University, Shane Solly, Analyst and Portfolio Manager at Harbour Asset Management, and Rod McDonald of Hawke's Bay Winery Te Awanga Estate, which exports wine to the US. Let's get straight into it. I just want to ask you your first quick impressions of the debate. I'm going to start with you, Shane.
Well, look, it was a really wide-ranging debate. I think from a capital market point of view, it still looks like a really close battle. Like, hard to pick a winner out of the two of them. I think some of the things that were said were consistent. So Mr. Trump said Trump stuff that we were expecting, so no surprises for capital markets there. Kamala Harris, again, on piste, probably didn't give us enough of her economic policy, so we were waiting for a bit. So, look, net for capital markets, we don't like election uncertainty.
Okay.
It didn't help us get rid of that election.
No, not enough detail, Asha.
Same here. I came out of it not learning much at all about policies on either side.
Okay. All right. Rod, what did you think?
Yes, I'm probably a bit of a layman in terms of what I took out of the debate, but certainly it was fiery and pretty short on detail, and that's what everybody was saying afterwards in terms of the breakdown. The commentators afterwards, they said it was short on real detail, but I think Kamala didn't do herself any harm.
I am actually the only person on this stage who has a plan that is about lifting up the middle class and working people of America.
Well, let's get some context about the American market and how important it is for our exports. Asha, how important is America for New Zealand?
America is extremely important, and it is growing in importance. It has actually supplanted Australia as the second biggest
Right, so
market.
Aussies used to be our second biggest, and now it's America.
Yes.
Okay, and it's growing. I mean, where is it growing? What's it growing in?
Particularly, goods have always been strong for New Zealand, so it's been growing on the goods front, dairy, meat, wine.
Yep.
But we're also seeing a lot of growth in services, not just tourism, but also new services like
what?
IT,
Okay.
Computer, software, business consulting.
Yep. And Shane, obviously American companies are the mainstay of big capital markets, so it's massively important.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
The economy obviously influences how we trade, but also things like the cost of capital, the interest rates. US interest rates are a start point for how everybody else decides how they allocate capital. US share markets have a big influence on the rest of the world's share markets, including here in New Zealand. So how we respond to those US policies, it is impactful.
And this is why we should care. Okay. Rod McDonald, right, so America is the number one export market for New Zealand wine. It's worth $800 million in 2023. You export there. How has the market been for you?
Look, it's been it's our biggest export market by some margin. It's been good. It's been in growth for us, probably 30 or 40% year on year. So it's a really it's a really important one for us, and we're having a lot of success there. But it's in a backdrop of a pretty turbulent domestic market with inflationary pressures and interest rates and all of that sort of thing. And the alcohol industry in general is in a bit of decline as well. So New Zealand's really swimming against the general trend. We're about 3% up as a sector of the market compared to other wine producers and alcohol wholesalers.
Okay, so it's going well and you're swimming against the tide. Are you already sort of having to pay federal taxes and things like that when you export into America? Are there barriers?
Yeah, sure. We're probably insulated a little bit. It's we sell FOB ex New Zealand, so those are borne by the importers and distributors of our wines in the various markets. But
right.
America's unique, and it's got a 3-tier system. So it's got an importer, a distributor or wholesaler, and then a retailer or reseller. So it's got to go through 3 sets of hands before it gets to the consumer.
You recently said that you might double your plan, imposing tariffs up to 20% on goods coming into this country. Vice President Harris has argued it'll mean higher prices on gas, food, clothing, medication. Do you believe Americans can afford higher prices because of tariffs?
They're not going to have higher prices. What's going to have and who's going to have higher prices is China and all of the countries that have been ripping us off for years.
The big one that could affect New Zealand, tariffs. Donald Trump is floating a 10 to 20% tariff on goods from perhaps countries that he says have been ripping us off for years, and I think 10 to 20% is for the friendly ones. So, Rod, let's go straight back to you. What possible effect could a 10 or even 20% tariff have on your business?
Yes, I think it's what we learned last time this happened in America, which was when the French wine tariffs, imported French wines, attracted like 60 to 80% tariffs 3 or 4 years ago. And I think the problem, if it was applied across the board evenly to all countries, then I guess everybody has to deal with the same situation. But the real problem that happened last time, and I expect would happen again, would be the subjective application of tariffs. So it's really all the other things that go on behind in terms of trading partners and various relationships. I know Australia and Chile have got free trade agreements, so you would expect that their tariffs might be lower. And other wine producing countries already on the back foot in terms of the application of whatever tariffs.
But tariffs don't spell good news for New Zealand wine going into the US?
I mean, of course not. It's going to affect profitability. The price is going to go up. But I think the domestic producers in America have also got a problem in terms of they're going through a bit of a bad patch. They're in the bottom of the cycle, if you like. So it's not as though the domestic market can supply. Okay,
let's talk the broader issue on tariffs. Asha, can we take such sweeping statements on tariffs seriously? There's no particular detail from Trump, 10 to 20%. Do we take that seriously?
I think that is the key problem here, in that we don't know if it's going to be 10% or 20% or 50% or 60%. And that is very bad for business and investment, because businesses don't like uncertainty. They can deal with a high tariff, but not uncertainty.
And Shane, I mean, do you concur with that?
Oh, I totally agree. I think uncertainty is the enemy of investing, full stop. And what we saw last time around was there is a second and third derivative impact of these tariff increases. So, for example, if China is impacted, then they slow demand for New Zealand goods and services down. And so we wear some of that. We are an indirect target. We indirectly get hit by this. Also, at the margin, is that tariff increase inflationary for goods and services in the US, which indeed means interest rates don't get cut to the degree that some people think they might do.
Okay, and you just mentioned China. Donald Trump's proposing 60% or more tariff on imports from China. Asha, does that spark a trade war?
Absolutely, not just with China, though. I'm very worried about retaliation coming from all kinds of countries.
Really?
And what that does is it tamps down on global demand, just like Shane was saying. So we're looking at global slowdown in growth, and that cannot be good for anyone. It's a lose-lose.
It's a lose-lose. And we're coming out of this sort of, recessionary hard times anyway, and hoping for some interest rate drops. And you're saying that this actually could be inflationary.
Absolutely. And I do want to bring up one other point about the distribution. The tariff is going to be borne mostly by middle-class families, and they're the ones that consume a lot of traded goods. The rich tend to save. Right. And so this means bad news for distributional aspects.
Shane, the markets see this talk of tariffs. Does that make them nervous?
Yeah, look, I think the only thing I would say is that what was talked about in the debate was consistent with what previous policy discussions, and we've yet to see them roll out. But we certainly see this as being a friction point, and I think a trade war is, as we were talking before, is bad for everybody. I think what we see is it's the only thing that came out in the debate was interesting. There was a broadening in the discussion from Mr. Trump. He directly talked about EV production in Mexico as being effectively the Chinese were subterfuging the system, getting around it all, and he was going to stomp on that.
Right.
It was possibly at the margin a bit more, more detail than he provided before.
Right.
So it's wider. His footprint is wider.
We're talking about the effect that, if there is a massive increase on Chinese imports into the US and it could spark a trade war, what are the further implications for you? I know you export a lot to the US, but are there other implications for you in terms of like demand being dampened in your other markets?
Yeah, I mean, we do export to China, but it's a relatively small market for us compared to the US. So in terms of our own business, the impact on other markets would probably be, it would have an impact, but what's going on in the States would be driving most of in terms of revenues and profits. That's really what's happening in America is going to be much more important than the rest of the world for us.
We should talk about Kamala Harris. She, there's no detail really about her trade policy. Can we take it from that, or should we take from that she's probably more pro-free trade or less tariffs than Trump, and would that benefit New Zealand more, Asha?
I think she will retain tariffs. I mean, the Biden administration has retained a lot of Trump tariffs. It might be more targeted, and so in terms of scale, the damage might be lower. But tariffs are here to stay, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, let's move on from tariffs, and there's another T word we should talk about, and that's taxes.
Donald Trump has no plan for you. And when you look at his economic plan, it's all about tax breaks for the richest people. I am offering what I describe as an opportunity economy.
So Kamala Harris favours tax hikes for corporates. Shane, would that be dampening on corporate sort of investment?
Yeah, look, I think one of the interesting things is that we're due to see a series of tax breaks that the Trump government actually had in place roll off. So there's actually a bit of a hit for earnings numbers that may come out of the US share market if indeed those policies roll off. So not only is it, if she increases, there's actually things that are rolling off that are beneficial at the moment.
So it could be a double hit you're talking about. The previous tax cuts roll off, and she could be hiking as well.
That's right. So I think the interesting thing here is, as per Asha's comments before, it's about distribution. We know both, whoever gets in government, they're going to be having big fiscal balances, right? They're going to spend. It's just about how they spend, whether it's tax cuts or whether it's child support or otherwise, and that is kind of will influence what parts of the economy do relatively better or relatively worse. But we do know that they're both going to be spending. Harris
is also proposing, and they didn't mention it in the debate, a tax on unrealised capital gains on $100 million households. So those are high net worth people, so they won't like that. So that may change their investment strategies. Asha, what do you think?
I think that is certainly possible, though capital at that level tends to be very flighty. It can move anywhere. It's not like people.
Right.
And so often we find from research that impacts of those kinds of taxes are tepid, mitigated.
Yep. Well, let's be clear that the Trump administration resulted in a trade deficit, one of the highest we've ever seen in the history of America.
Let's go back to navigating a US election. Okay, Rod, I want to come back to you. You've been in the wine business for a while. We won't say how long. But have you had to navigate a US election before, and what were the ramifications?
Yeah, I mean, we've been exporting to the US since, in earnest, probably since about 2015. So we've had a couple of elections, and they've really never significantly impacted our trading in the US, but we've really only been trading substantially or materially for the last sort of 4 or 5 years. I think, anybody, if they're setting up an export strategy, you're going to look for diversity of market so that you can manage this kind of situation when it happens in any trading market. But of course, you fish where the fish are, and if you're doing well, you concentrate there. So we are, as I said earlier, we are impacted more heavily with what happens in the US. It's our biggest trading partner. But to be honest, the exchange rate that we've managed in the last sort of 3 or 4 years has been as volatile and had more impact than any trade tariffs applied to other countries in the last sort of 5 or 6 years, for sure.
Okay.
I mean, to be trading at 60 cents or 58 cents compared to 85 or 86 cents, I think it got to, that really knocks the stuffing out of profitability as an exporter.
Okay. In terms of the political stance and messaging out of the US from either side, would you be favouring a bit more detail or a bit more like, this is actually the rate that I'm going to put in if I get in?
Yeah, and I think the chances of getting that are really slim. I think the point I was trying to make before is the subjective application of tariffs. It's going to be agendas other than what you see on the surface. It's going to be driving the application of those tariffs to various trading partners. If it was a flat application, I think that would be more manageable than I think the reality, which will be slightly more volatile and who's in favour and who they're trying to slow down and who they're trying to speed up in terms of access to their market, which is their right, you know.
Yeah. I just wonder from the sort of election political perspective, Asha, maybe you can answer this since you've lived over there. Is this messaging about tariffs a political manoeuvre more than an economic mover?
Absolutely.
Yes.
It's all about politics now,
Yeah.
very little about economics.
Yeah.
I think it's very real that trade has not benefited everyone equally. There are people that are hurting and they want to see a change. And I think both candidates are speaking to that. And part of it is valid.
Yep. Part of it is valid. There's been some economic analysis of both Kamala Harris's and Donald Trump's sort of ideas to boost the US economy. Goldman Sachs sees that the biggest boost would be from Harris, and that Trump's might be inflationary. Would you agree with that? I mean, of what you know in terms of just basic policies?
Yes, I think Kamala Harris focuses on the middle class, and I think the middle class is hurting right now. Mm-hmm. If they grow, the economy grows simply because they tend to spend more. They don't save as much as the rich. With the rich, you do see some benefits. So with a tax cut that favors the rich, they might demand more, for New Zealand, for example, more niche products like protein powder or sports equipment.
Or wine.
Or wine,
yes,
high-end
that's right.
wine. So you might see some of that. But overall, for the economy, tariffs are extremely inflationary because we haven't talked about the fact that parts and components are going to become more expensive when you lay tariffs. And that means U.S. producers will become less competitive. Tariffs are inefficient in terms of how they allocate resources, and that is bad for the whole economy. It's a global...
So explain it to me, the lay guy. So parts and components, so things that make up a particular product are also going to be impacted by tariffs on the way through, and so the cost is incrementally getting bigger and bigger to the final product, which has also got a tariff on it.
Absolutely. So if you're making a car and suddenly it's now more expensive to import seats because there's a tariff on importing seats, then your car is becoming more expensive and it's not competitive anymore.
We're a nation that's in serious decline. We're being laughed at all over the world. All over the world, they're laughing. I know the leaders very well. They're coming to see me. They call me. We're laughed at all over the world. They don't understand what happened to us as a nation.
Look, this was probably the only time we might see Trump and Harris face off. So having had a look at this debate, I mean, because Kamala Harris wants another debate. I don't know that Trump does. There isn't one scheduled. But having seen what we've seen so far, was there anything that really sort of tips the balance from a New Zealand business perspective? Shane?
Look, I think when we go back, we have actually benefited from a strong US economy. Tourism has actually been strong. Hopefully they've gone to have some nice Te Awanga wine
yes.
those sorts of things. So we have actually been benefiting from a strong US economy. We are in a period of time where we're seeing a slowdown in activity in general from a strong base. It's still in reasonable order. And we are seeing the US Federal Reserve neutralise interest rates to try and keep that, particularly employment, rolling along. So anything that destabilises that mix is going to be a bit of a risk for the US economy, and that will flow through to our part of the world as well, whether we like it or not. Again, we touched on China as a second derivative. There's lots of evidence that the Chinese producers are moving a lot of product into the US right now, trying to front run this tariff situation.
So get in before it happens, if it happens. Yeah.
So, and again, that's a timing issue.
Yeah.
But I think for our economy, we do need to be mindful of it in terms of that US economy has been helpful. It's been a bit of an engine room for the last 3 or 4 years. And certainly there's some implications for some businesses from some of these policy changes. So we do need to keep a bit of an eye on it. But I think key thing is there's a long way to go to this election. It's still pretty close.
Yep.
One could end up running the House, one could run the Senate. That could be a split.
Yep.
So there's a lot of
It's just not clear cut,
components,
and there's still 56 days to go. Okay, Asha, is there anything that tips it in favour of New Zealand? Any particular policy, or we just don't know?
I think we don't know, but I do think that either way, some people in New Zealand will probably benefit and others might lose. So there
Right.
might be a winner and loser.
Winner and loser. And coming back to you, Rod, at the end here, do you see yourself being a winner or a loser out of any of these particular policies?
Yeah, well, I think, talking to our importer earlier today, he said ultimately it's probably the consumers in the US that will lose from his point of view. And this is specifically to wine, but I guess you might be able to expand it slightly wider. In as much as domestic producers will, if they do what they've done in the past, they'll put up their prices to meet the new prices of the imported goods to take extra margin, not pass on any savings. So that in itself causes some inflationary pressure as well, which means they're paying more for they're paying more for wine in general, and it becomes inflationary, and it's the consumers and drinkers that lose, and they're the ones we really are trying to be best friends with. So
Absolutely, yes. And that wraps up this episode of Back in Business. Audio clips of the debate are listed in the podcast description. And for more bespoke business news, subscribe at nbr.co.nz. Thanks to content producer Joseph Hisayasu and creative director Michael Hickmott. Next week, we talk digital colonisation as we mark Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori. I'm Simon Shepherd. Mā te wā.